Good morning and welcome to Lattes and Leaders with Dr. Brad Johnson, best-selling author and accomplished public speaker specializing in education and educational leadership. I am your co-host, Jeremy Johnson, organizational psychology consultant specializing in career coaching, training, and development. Meet us here each week to discuss topics in education and leadership and meet with some of the top education talent and thought partners from across the globe. So grab your latte, sit back, and enjoy a relaxed conversation that will leave you informed and encouraged.
Welcome to Lattes and Leaders. We are excited today to have our special guest, Kim Strobel, with us. And we are so excited for you to come and share your experiences and your expertise with wellness and happiness. So hopefully we'll have a good time with you today. So thank you for stopping by.
Oh, thank you so much. I'm really happy to be here too, Brad.
All right. Just to jump right in, do you care to just share a little bit about your educational journey where the listeners can kind of see how you've progressed through the years?
Yes, of course. Well, as soon as I got out of high school, I went to college and I was actually majoring in business, believe it or not, because I don't know, I just felt like I wanted to run my own business someday. But that trajectory got completely detoured, and I ended up quitting college after a year. And we can talk a little bit more about this later, Brad. But I suffered from a very debilitating anxiety disorder called panic disorder, and I had that with agoraphobia. So my life became very limited, and I ended up quitting college and coming back home to the safety of my parents' house and working as a secretary for the next probably, I guess, 4 years. And so then I went back and did college the hard way, which meant I had a 40-hour a week day job. And then I had a boss that would let me come in every morning at 4:30 and kind of start to get my work hours in so that I could leave at 1 o'clock and I could drive 90 minutes to the University of Southern Indiana. And I would stay there till 10 or 11 o'clock at night. And so for 3 years, that's what I did. And I had decided at that time to go into teaching, that I wanted to become a teacher. So I felt like I worked really, really hard to get that teaching degree. And when I got out, Brad, I don't know if you remember this or not, this would have been like the late 90s. There were no teaching jobs available. And so I had this teaching degree and I ended up working the first 2 years as a program assistant. I remember I made $8 an hour at the time, and I was a young single mother. So I rode the special needs bus for an hour in the morning and an hour in the afternoon after school was out, because that generated an extra $16 a day, and 16 times 5 was $80. And at that time in the year 2000, that paid my son's daycare bill for the week.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So when I finally landed that classroom, that fourth grade classroom, I was just ecstatic. And I loved teaching. I loved walking with students 180 days a year. I really did. I felt on fire with it. But there was a part of me that just kind of felt then that I wanted to do more leading. And so I ended up stepping into a literacy coordinator's position for a couple years. And then from there, I went into school leadership. Specifically, I was a curriculum director, which was a great opportunity. It allowed me to really look at classroom instruction, grades K through 12. And, uh, and then in 2016, I decided I was going to launch Strobel Education, which is now my business and what I do. And I really work to empower teachers and school leaders in a multitude of ways. But that's kind of the shortened version of a very long and painful story, to be honest with you, at times.
It is. And we'll definitely get more into the latter part of it here in a few minutes. But as you look back over your educational journey and not just to become a teacher, but just through your K-12 experience, was there anyone that really influenced you or had an impact on you, maybe even going into the field or just in general that really just connected with you?
You know, when I got my first job at Perry Central Community Schools here in Southern Indiana, The assistant superintendent was about my age. Her name's Tara Bishop. And I told Tara, put me in the hallway that has the very best teacher so that I can learn because I don't know what I'm doing. And she not only made sure of that, but she continually put books in my hands about how to become a stronger teacher. And I have always been a prolific reader for most of my adult life, but I just felt like she was constantly putting the right books in my hands, whether it was about how to engage students, how to create, lessons that were interactive. And I was just glued to it. And I feel like she had such a profound, I think she recognized in me that this is someone who's a grower and wants to be a learner herself. And so she fed that information to me. And it was a great gift early in my career.
Yeah, that's so important to have people like that that see our potential and help us get there. And I'm like you, I think the reading part's so important. That's one thing that I, take seriously and definitely encourage all leaders to do. When you think about like the business field, for example, they say that most CEOs read about 40 or 50 books a year. And so it really is about just gaining more information that you can draw from, knowledge you can draw from, and to have more wisdom. I think when you have more that you can, draw from to make decisions and things like that.
Yes.
As you move through and moved into leadership roles and things like that, what do you think? And you can answer this one of two ways. What do you think was your one or two major strengths of leadership that you had, or even just a couple that you think are important for people to have to help them in their leadership role?
I feel like maybe one of my gifts as a leader, and I certainly had my weaknesses as well. As you know, school leadership is just the responsibilities that we have are enormous, and trying to deal with the challenges that we have to navigate by making sure there's forward momentum. But Brad, I'm kind of an open book. I'm a very open and vulnerable about sharing my own struggles, or things even on the job that were difficult for me. And I found that as I worked with the staff and with teachers, the more I was willing to just admit my own weaknesses and my own struggles, that it kind of made them feel like they could open up to me and also share their struggle in a way that felt safe. And so I feel like I was really good at creating that sense of connection with the people that I worked with, and that they did see me as just a real person and not someone who is showing up playing a part or a role.
I like that. Yeah. And it's, talk about being vulnerable. I think it really does allow them to see that it's okay for them to be that way, that they don't have to feel like they know everything, or that they don't know help, or that they don't need help, and that you show them that it's okay to be that way, not just that maybe they feel that way, but that it's okay. And just building that connection you talk about, I think that's so important. So when you're open and honest with them, they're more willing to be open and honest with you. And research really is clear that when we can open up in that personal way, and I like that, in that you purposely said that in that manner, but when we see them as people, as humans first, and make that connection, it really does build a level of trust, because they see that you value them as a person, not just as a teacher or whatever their role is. And I think that is so important. That connection really helps build the professional relationship too.
Yeah, I just spoke to a principal who is stepping into a supervisor role in a completely different setting. And he told me recently, he said, Kim, the first day I met with the staff, I just said, look, honestly, I have no idea what I'm doing. you know and I thought, how powerful would that be to hear the true honest statement that he doesn't know what he's doing and he's going to do his best to figure it out, but letting them know that he's not somebody up there who's like, we're going to do all this great stuff and we're going to, he was just so real with his people. And I said, gosh, that must have just paid in big time when you just get up there and say the truth of the matter. I don't know what I'm doing yet.
Yeah. Yeah. I think being authentic is the one of the major pieces of being a leader. And like you said, it's just like I talk about with teachers in the classroom. If you're not authentic, children know a phony. They
Yes.
can tell immediately, but we can as adults too. And so when
Yeah.
someone's able to come in and say, "Hey, this is the reality," it really does speak volumes to you, and allows them to have empathy even for the leader and to make that connection. So that is refreshing to hear, if nothing else. That like you said, he almost had the confidence to say that, which is
Yes.
a wonderful thing.
Yes.
Share a little bit about what you're doing now, how you got to that point, because I think you do a wonderful thing because we all know the pressure that teachers are under. We know the stress, we know the burnout rate, the attrition rate. And so we really do have to build teachers up. And, I try to keep that positive message, but I know you're doing wonderful things in that area. So let's just jump right there and let you share a little bit of that.
Yeah, of course. Well, when I started the business in 2016, I was a one woman show and I went into schools and provided professional development training on anything from standards based grading, growth mindset, reading strategies. I was just passionate about curriculum and about professional development and about really classroom instruction. And so we still provide professional development trainings on, I think, 17 different topics, but I call them my girls, which I found out recently that somebody thought that my daughters worked in the business when I refer to them as the girls. But I have two amazing consultants who now go out into the field and do the day long trainings. And then we've, of course, expanded to a lot of online courses now. But what I do, Brad, is I run the back end of the business. And then my very favorite thing that I do is motivational speaking. And so, I took 22 flights in the month of August and I was on a stage. It felt like sometimes every day in a different state. And I speak a lot about what's called the science of happiness, the secret to better work and to better life. And sometimes I think that when we hear happiness, I always say I'm not a proponent of what we hear as toxic positivity, and I've been guilty of it before. And I think that many times as school leaders, we're a little guilty of toxic positivity, and we do it for the right reasons. But we kind of tout things like, you know what, we're going to show up and we're going to be the very best we can be for these kids this year. Like kids deserve your very best, and like I get that, but I feel like in all honesty, that these teachers cannot show up and be the best version of themselves if we're not really meeting their mental and emotional health needs as well. And you just stated this is something that is rampant right now in this profession. I call a spade a spade, and the bottom line is at many times we can feel like the whole education system is out of control and that we simply cannot keep up with the cognitive demands. There's not enough hours in the day to do or complete what is expected of us. And I know this to be true, but what I tell people is I don't want to concentrate or focus on the uncontrollables. The only thing that we can control, Brad, is how you and I choose to show up in this system of education. And I always tell people that's where your real power lies because we can play victim to a system all day long. We know there's a lot of struggle around it. And I think we need to talk about the hard in order to get to the good. But I also know that when we learn that it's not so much the system happening to us, but it's how we choose to operate in this system, that's where we take our power back. And when you have your power back and you feel like you have a little bit of agency over your life, then you can start to create some forward momentum. And so that's really where the happiness, research comes in. and it's directly related to well-being in employees. And I'll tell you some of the research a little bit later on that, but we know that when we can teach your people how to have a brain that goes to positive more than negative, neutral, or stressed, that we see productivity levels soar, engagement levels soar, and creativity soar. And so it's no longer this kind of frivolous thing. It's time that we actually put action behind our message of employee well-being.
Yeah, and it is true. One of the things that I talk about is personality traits, and teachers tend to be called or in what's called high agreeableness. And with that, they're kind, they're caring, empathetic, which are great traits to have, and that's part of what draws them to education. But the challenge to that is because they're like that, they have a hard time setting boundaries, saying no, handling conflict. And so those are the things that build up and add to the stress, add to the burnout, and that type of thing. So like you said, it really is important to have that positive mindset. And I'm like you, I've sometimes heard people like, oh, that's positive toxicity, but I don't really see it that way. I'm like, it sounds more like you have very negative toxicity when someone's talks about that. But it's I guess it is well meaning, and I understand sometimes that there may be people that are just giving lip service to it. But I think for the most part, most administrators do mean it in the right way, but we don't do a
I
very good
agree.
job. But we don't do a
Yeah,
very good job of fixing it and correcting it. Like you said, something as simple as having that positive mindset. Because I'm in agreement with you, and I love the wording that you use. Is that it's we choose every day to go. The teacher's making that choice, because sometimes we hear, and I have a thing that I tweet out that people say you don't have to, you get to, but it's even more than that. It's that you choose to. And when you make
mm,
that choice, it's like you were talking about, part of that, when you choose to do something, you're taking ownership of it because you're making the conscious effort to do it. So when we're able to do that, when we make that choice to go in, it is important as much as possible to be positive and to have that kind of mindset, and to look for the good things, and to get the best out of it so that we do survive. Because it's not just about, you talk about, and we were talking earlier about the attrition rate, and the teacher shortage, but just people coming into the field now, because it is, education's almost just, almost at a breaking point in a lot of ways, because people know if they're coming into teaching, it's a role that's has such burden to it, and so much on the plate, and they're not really paid enough for it. So that's why we see such a high rate of turnover. But, the other problem now is seeing that we just don't have enough people coming in to replace them. And so it's probably more important now than ever to have, let's focus on the positive things. Let's look at health. Let's look at wellness. Let's see how that we can help them not burn out.
yes. Yeah, you're so right. And like with the research, I mean, 90% of our long-term happiness, Brad, comes from how our brain, the lens through which our brain sees our world. So this is why there are people in our schools, and again, I'm not negating the stress at all, but it's really about perspective. And like you said, it's choosing. We have agency when we choose. And this profession, there's no other profession where you step into a school 180 days a year and you get the ability to have a profound effect and impact on students. That is not to be taken lightly. And while we know your paycheck does not reflect the value you bring, everybody that I know, Brad, that went into this profession, we went into it because, like you said, we have this heart that says, this is how I want to positively impact the world. And I believe I can do it by reaching and teaching these students. And so, again, I do believe we have to talk about the heart of this education and the system that we're in. but we also have to work really hard to control our thoughts, actions, and behaviors around this. And when I share the happiness research, we'll talk about that piece. But truly, you know, we're talking about mindset work and us taking responsibility for how we choose to view, see, and operate in this very sacred, noble career.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things that I talk about is bringing their best. I talk about being world class, but the first part of that piece is the mindset. You have to have that mindset. You have to develop that positive mindset. I call it, what is your recorder playing? When you wake up every morning, how do you talk to yourself? Are you building yourself up? Or you're bringing yourself down? Because our brain tends to be drawn to the negative because we're wired that way for survival. Like you said, choosing to change your mindset. I was looking at some of the research the other day. They were talking about, and you may share this, and it's kind of a new twist for in psychology, but they're talking about one of the worst things we can do. They were talking about people that go to see, like, they're in therapy a long time and they're like, there's absolutely nothing wrong with it, probably more people could benefit from it, but they're like, but if that therapy's focus is on you just ruminating on the negative, if you just are focusing on the things that are wrong, that it actually is more harmful than good. And I think that's, like you said, that's a powerful piece to, where is our focus? Are we just focusing on what's wrong, and is that bringing us down? Or do we say, yeah, things are bad, things aren't, could definitely be better, but I've got to shift that mindset. I've got to choose to be more positive, to be more grateful, those types of things, where that I can, be okay and stay healthy and not burn out and survive, or do more than survive, but really, do our best and become our best.
Yeah, let me give you a fun fact on what you just said, Brad. So, if you're an average human being, what we know is that you have about 70,000 thoughts a day.
Hmm.
And we also know that 80% of a person's thoughts in a day's time are negative,
Negative.
which means
Yeah.
when most of us put our head down on the pillow at night, Brad, you know this, we've had 56,000 negative thoughts.
Thoughts.
And what's crazy about that is 95% of the 80% of thoughts that are negative are the exact same thoughts that ran in your mind the day before.
Yeah.
So when you're talking about those recordings, that's what you're talking about. We have these scripts that play in our mind every day. And I tell people, and some people might think, oh, are you serious, Kim? But like literally from the time we wake up, I tell people some of you have had 67 negative thoughts in the first 30 seconds because you woke up and you went, "Ah, I didn't get enough sleep." And then you start walking to the bathroom and you're talking about your back hurting in your mind. And then and I say some people have had like, 76 negative thoughts within the first minute of waking. So a deliberate practice that I do, and some may think this is silly, but when I wake up, I literally say, today is going to be a great day. I'm putting that intention out there. Yes, there's going to be challenges to overcome, but my intention is that today is going to be a great day. And it goes into the gratitude, which, by the way, Brad, that is one of the top 5 happiness habits, is the practice of gratitude. And we can talk about what that looks like too going forward. But it's really what I teach are the science-based tools for when you cultivate happiness habits in your life, you show up as a better version of yourself in every single area of your life.
Right. Right. Yeah, absolutely. I believe that's true, because it doesn't, it fit, one of the things that I talk about, and sometimes I'll use the word because it's so ingrained within us, work life balance, but there's really just life, and we have to figure out how to navigate it, whether we're working or not. And so we have to figure out how to make it. My thing is that I, especially with teachers, I'm like, you we have to learn how to make school fun, positive experience, not just for the students, but for the teachers. Because if you
Yes.
have a good day at school, you're probably going to have a good day at home, or a good night at home. And if you have a bad day at school, it's probably going to carry over into the night. So there's not really a separation of it, but there's just a continuation of it. And like you said, we have to have that right mindset for it to be good. If it's miserable in part of it, it's probably going to be miserable in the other part. And, that's just not a healthy place to be in. And we can see why people are stressed and burn out and, have just the struggles that they have.
Yeah. I'm laughing, Brad, because in my book, Teach Happy, Small Steps to Big Joy, this is kind of the blueprint for how we create more peace and ease in our life as well as happiness as we navigate this profession. But I'm laughing because there's an entire chapter on why I think we need to throw out the word balance, because I feel like balance is unachievable, and I replace that word with flow. And I say it's more
Mm,
about finding flow in our life. Are we directing energy and actions towards the pieces of our life that are important? And it doesn't mean that we have to be knocking it out of the ballpark in all of these areas, but it's really looking at these 8 pieces of the pie that make for a fulfilling life, from your marriage to your parenting, your health and fitness, your spirituality, your career. There's 8 pieces of the pie, but what happens is our career gets so much of that it takes away from all these other important pieces that are really important. And I talked to a school principal a couple of weeks ago, and he said, Kim, my wife said to me, she said, look, I've watched you now for the last 10 years literally spend every waking moment at the school, and I know that you love and care about your students. I get it. But I'm going to tell you right now, 4 years from now, your 4 kids are still going to be here, and those kids aren't. And he goes, Kim, as hard as that was to receive, I finally got it. After 10 years, I got what she was saying. And she needed to say that, like, as a shocker, because that's the truth. I have to start putting more of my energy into my family life, even though I'm incredibly dedicated to my role as a principal of this school.
yeah, I mean, that's so true. Whether it's a administrator or teacher, it goes back to that. Don't give your best at school and then leave what's left for your family, because yeah, at the end of the day, they're with you for your life. And so, it's so important that you don't shortchange them. Speaking of that, and when we talk about even like with educator like him with self-care and spending time with family, what do you do to do that balance? Or maybe you would offer suggestions to administrators to find that balance, or and we use the word balance, but for self-care, I'll use that word
Yes.
instead to do.
Yes. Well, I actually use the word radical wellness instead of self care, because I do think that sometimes we talk about self care, and I think that people don't quite understand what it means. It's way more than just go out and take a walk or get yourself a massage. Um, I call it radical wellness, Brad, because it means that we have to do some hard things in our life. And you referenced this earlier in the interview, creating boundaries. That is not easy work to do, but I'm telling you, if you want to get your life back, you are going to have to start saying no to some things that you're used to saying yes to. And this is messy and it's uncomfortable work, and it's work that we must do, because if we really want to change the trajectory of how we feel in our lives on a daily basis, then we have to make some difficult decisions. And so, like, I have a whole chapter on how do we even do that. But I tell people, I've been a practitioner of this work now for 20 years. I have been in the self-help field for 30 years because of my own struggle with panic disorder. And I was a woman, Brad, who struggled to walk 5 minutes around the block, to walk to my mailbox, to drive my car to Walmart. I had agoraphobia. I didn't trust my brain and body to do anything, and I felt severely inadequate because I really couldn't function very well in life. But sometimes a person's pain gets turned into their purpose, which is what it is for me. And 30 years ago, I started a self help journey where I decided that I was going to work on the inside of Kim Strobel so that I could begin to get those outside results. And so I'm going to tell you my daily routine, Brad. And when people listen, they're going to be like, well, good grief, Kim, I can't do that. So don't start where Kim Strobel is right now. Okay. This has taken years. Um, I'm a practitioner of transcendental meditation. So meditation is one of the top 5 happiness habits. And I tell people you can simply start out with a 5-minute practice. I currently have a 20-minute morning practice and a 20-minute evening practice, but I'm also an empty nester. I don't have kids at home anymore. I do write out my daily gratitudes every single day because that's the number one way we can rewire our brain towards positive. And the research shows that if we write down 3 different things that we're thankful for every single day, that somewhere between days 21 and 30, we create a new neural feedback loop in our brain, and more good than bad starts to ping. So wake up, do my meditation, write my gratitudes, write my affirmations, read. I usually spend some time reading from whatever personal help book I'm reading. And then I am an avid exerciser. So this morning I went downstairs and did my Beachbody workout for 45 minutes. My favorite thing to do is run. I used to run 40 miles a week, and now I've added some weightlifting. So we're trying to rewire my brain a little bit better that way. But I literally have, Brad, intentional happiness habits that are literally non-negotiable in my life. And I've learned that when I prioritize my own happiness and well-being, that Scott Strobel gets a way better wife, our son Spencer gets a way better mom, and I show up differently in my life now because I have made this a priority to my well-being.
Absolutely. And I think the morning part is so important, like you said, to wake up and focus on the gratitude. Because like you said, if you don't, it's real easy to let those negative thoughts just pile up early in the morning. I call it the oh crap, it's Monday. When
Yes.
and that's, people with the negative mindset, especially on Monday, it's like, oh crap, it's Monday. And I'm like, that's that's 1/7 of your life. That's 11 years of your life that you
Oh,
are
Brad, I
waking
love
up.
that analogy. I love that
And
analogy.
and so focusing on that positive, like you said, it's hard because my thing is, and I know it's been said before, but it's hard to be negative when you're grateful. And so when you wake up in the morning and you
Yes.
have that mindset, it really does start to feed the day. And your day often becomes what those first few minutes in that, I'm like, the first thing we feed ourselves in the morning is not breakfast, it's our thoughts. And what are those thoughts? And there's those thoughts building us up or tearing us down. So you're exactly right. And it really does, the day becomes what we are feeding ourselves.
It does. That's really powerful. I love that what you said here, this last 60 seconds. It's a great way to really summarize how we begin to take control of our life.
So when you think of that, and I love that you, like you said, you're intentional and you schedule it. It is really about setting those boundaries, and I think that's one thing educators have a hard time doing, whether they're an administrator or a teacher, whatever their role. I just think that's one of those things we tend not to, because we feel guilty if we do. Like you said, you have to learn to say no, and they may learn, but even when they do this, they're going to still feel guilty about it, and we have to move past that because like you said, we have to be at our best to give our best. Is there a
Yes.
piece of advice you would give a new leader, maybe on leadership or maybe on the health part or the wellness part?
Yeah. Well, I think I want to quickly share the happiness research because it plants a lot of hope for people.
Okay.
Um, so, what we know is that we all have what's called a set baseline happiness level, Brad. So, maybe your set baseline is a little bit higher than mine. And what we know is it fluctuates. So, good things happen in our lives and we get a boost in happiness, but it's always going to return back to the baseline. And the
Mm,
same is actually true. Positive psychology and lots of research has found that as humans we can endure really hard things, but after a time we will actually reset back to whatever our baseline is. And so then the question becomes, well, why is Brad's baseline higher than yours, Kim? Where does that come from? And so if you think of your happiness as a pie chart, what we know is that 50% of your long-term happiness is genetic. It
mm.
comes from your mom or dad or a mixture of both. And Brad, when I say this, I will see 80% of the heads in the crowd drop, and I will hear whispers that say, I'm so screwed. Some people are like, oh my gosh, 50% comes from my parents. And I'm like, I know that sounds like a large number, but it's the same reason that some of us can look at a McDonald's French fry and gain 5 pounds, and others of us can eat. There's a genetic disposition here,
Yeah.
but hang tight with me. Where I find it gets really interesting is that we can take every single external circumstance that a person has had in their whole life, what kind of childhood, what kind of home they grew up in, what kind of job they have, what kind of money they make, what kind of home they live in. Like literally every single external circumstance, we can throw it into the pie, and it only accounts for about 10% of our long term happiness.
Wow.
But if you're like Kim Strobel, you let some things and some people steal way more than 10% for far too long.
Mm.
Yeah, and I got all kinds of stuff to say about that, but I know we need to get close to wrapping it up. So if 50% is genetic, Brad, and 10% is based on our external circumstances, that leaves 40% of the pie left. And what I know is that human beings can raise their baselines by up to 40%, which
Wow.
is what I focus on when I work with people, because it has to do with these three things. That 40% has to do with the thoughts you're thinking, the actions you're taking, and the behaviors or the habits that
Mm.
you have in place. And when we focus on those, we literally can raise the happiness and well-being levels. And when that happens, the research says that a brain at positive is 31% more
Oh,
productive
yeah.
than a brain at negative, neutral, or stressed. A brain at positive is 10 times more engaged in its job, Brad, than a brain at negative, neutral, or stressed. But I tell people everybody says, Kim, I want to be happier. I don't want to feel this much stress. I don't want to feel defeated all the time. What do I do? And I say, that's where we help. I tell you how to do it. I tell you what the research says. And honestly, that's what the book is. It's a blueprint that tells you, okay, you ready to do this work? You ready to change your life? You ready to create more ease and flow into your life? Well, these are the small steps that you take to do it.
Mm. Excellent. Excellent. Yeah. And it is. It's that choosing too.
It
You can
is.
talk
I
about
mean,
it, you can think about it, but you have to
yes,
choose to do it. Absolutely.
you got to take action. I mean, Brad, I can tell by looking at you from across the screen that you're somebody who's physically fit. It's very apparent. You must do weightlifting, you do something. So you don't just say I want a stronger body. You can't just tout that. You back it up with action, right? You obviously have a very strong discipline of working out. So again, I feel like none of this matters if we don't really put actions behind our words.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're right. I have my whole life. I've been lifted weights since I was a teenager. So
Oh,
it's
well,
more of a
Brad, since
struggle
you're
now, but
well, since you're a book reader, I've got to tell you the next book that you're going to want to read, and it's called Outlive by Dr. Peter Attia. Have you heard of it?
Mm-mm.
Oh my gosh, you're going to love it, Brad, because I did a post on my Instagram the other day about from him, but he literally says exercise is the number one thing we can do, and it literally changes us at a DNA and
Right.
cellular level.
Oh,
It is the
absolutely.
number one thing, and it's one of the top 5 happiness habits, by the way.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I did know that. Awesome. Well, I have one more question for you before we go. Now, being the health person now, you may not have one of the choices usually, but what is your hot beverage of choice?
My hot beverage. Okay, well, I have to tell you, Brad, I'm a voracious exerciser, but my eating habits are kind of crap, and I'm working on those. Okay, so I'm the girl that used to eat 4 Hostess cupcakes every night before she went to bed. So we're working on it. Okay, but my favorite hot. I don't drink coffee. I am a hot chai tea
Oh,
person.
okay.
Yes.
That's mine too, actually. Chai latte is
Yes.
I love them. I try not to get them often because I know they have the calories, but If I'm near a Starbucks, a lot of times I'll sneak in there and grab one. So that I'm with you on that one. So, and I think you're the first person to have that one. So
Oh,
good
yes.
job.
All right. I feel great.
I will admit, in the fall, I'll occasionally get the pumpkin spice latte.
Oh,
Just
people go crazy over that, don't
yeah,
they?
just for the season. So, but not many. But anyway, thank you so much for being on and sharing. I love that. I love your message. I love what you're doing to help teachers. We'll share your information on the webpage for people to find your book and your website and everything. So, but just thank you for taking the time to come on today and to share your story.
Well, thank you, Brad. I have to say, I started following you a few years ago, and so many of these sayings and these quotes that you come up with, I'm like, this guy is obviously well deep into the personal development field. And I'm just astounded. Like your post, they inspire me. So thank you for
Oh,
that.
oh, well, thank you so much. I appreciate that. All right. Well, thank you so much again, and I hope you have a great day.
This has been Lattes and Leaders with Dr. Brad Johnson. We hope that you leave today feeling informed and inspired. For more educational content, be sure to add this podcast to your list and follow Dr. Johnson on any and all social media platforms. For more information on Dr. Johnson, Jeremy Johnson, and special guest, check out drbradjohnson.com. That is DOCTOR, bradjohnson.com. Hope to have you back soon.